This is the Prophet 600. That is the Fender Chroma Polaris. Hello, gorgeous people. I'm Vulture Culture, and we're going to be checking out these two synthesizers tonight. These are two incredible vintage synthesizers. The Sequential Circuits Prophet 600 is from 1982, and the Fender Chroma Polaris, the only synthesizer Fender ever released, is from 1984. I looked on Reverb today, and I was able to find a Sequential Prophet 600 for about $1,600 with shipping, making it pretty reasonable even by modern analog synth standards. And the Fender Chroma Polaris, they've actually come down in price a bit after the great Norwegian synth deflation. And you could get one of these bad boys for $2,100 with shipping. So there's about a $500 difference between the two of these. And we're going to jump in and talk about the oscillators, the filter, all of those fun things. And what's great about both of these synths is they have a lot of knobs and faders so that they're super hands-on. They have 2 voltage-controlled oscillators per voice, no digitally controlled oscillators here. So let's just go ahead and try to, sort of reset the synthesizer to sort of a basic setting of something that looks kind of like this. Oscillators, we'll just have one oscillator up. And we will use, I think everything else is good. I think that's looking about right. And then same thing, let's see, we should have a sawtooth. And you can hear a little bit of reverb that's from my plugin, Inktomi. You can get that plugin for free. The link is in the description. We'll do the exact same thing over here to the to actually take the synthesizer into sort of a neutral state as well. We'll just turn down the sweep depth, resonance down, envelope depth, cut off all the way up, key tracking all the way off. I should turn that off over here too. The envelope, we'll leave this kind of like a sort of a standard setting, and we will bring the decay all the way up. So this is an interesting thing. We've just got an ADR on this synth, but if you put the decay all the way up, you get full sustain. So we should be hearing just a sawtooth. Hearing like a weird... There we go. I guess the pulse width has to be all the way down on this. I don't know. That's interesting. So big volume difference there, so we'll try to just compensate for that. Something like around there. So what's interesting, Paul, is that both of these synths actually have the exact same filter, which is a 3374 Curtis filter and amplifier on a single chip. So they have the same filters and the same amplifiers, which is why I think they're so interesting to compare. The oscillators are actually different. The oscillators here are the 3340s, I think, are the CM oscillators. These are the same oscillators that were in the original Sequential Circuits Prophet Prophet 5 Rev 2. But they're also used in synthesizers like the Oberheim OBXA, the Jupiter 6, all sorts of synthesizers use this very classic combo of oscillators. The Chroma Polaris actually uses 3374 dual voltage-controlled oscillators. And they do sound different, as we will hear, especially as we start combining the detune. What's shocking to me is, considering these are both Curtis chip synths, how different they can sound. So let's go ahead and check out we'll just start with the sawtooth wave, and then things will get more complicated from there. So immediately you can hear, just even on that real growly low oscillator, a difference. A little brighter here. I cannot open the filter any further. If I increase the filter sustain and the envelope depth, I'm still not getting anything. I mean, it's a very slight difference in the upper frequencies. I don't know what those frequencies are, but the very highest frequencies in there, you guys can probably hear a difference. Let me know if you're hearing a difference or if it's just me going crazy. Again, you can now hear, so right in the mid-range, they're the most similar, but you can hear that the sequential has a more scooped sound to it. Maybe it's just a more flat sound to the oscillator, but what I mean is that there's a lot of brightness and low end, a lot of fizz and buzz. It's quite beautiful. Chroma Polaris has a lot more weight to it. A lot more mid-range. Highest notes. Very similar on the highest notes, but in the middle here, you can hear that beautiful buzzy top end on the sequential circuits. Aquatic Borealis, welcome to the stream. How's it going, my friend? Man, is there a huge difference here. Let me increase the decay all the way. Listen to the buzz on that. Is much more truncated. The warmth, though. Bring this down a little bit. It's a little bit, the Polaris is a little louder. Interesting little like metallic note in there. Big metallic versus over here. It's just very flat and beautiful. Very bright, very buzzy. Listen to those. You can really hear the resonances in the reverb, actually. Listen to that. Dave, the Chroma Polaris is from 1984, and the Sequential Circuits Prophet 600 is from 1982. And they're both very similar in the sense that they have digital control over a lot of what's going on under the hood, digital envelopes and stuff like that. But a completely analog circuit path. They're also both mono output synths, meaning all 6 voices of both synths are summed down to one channel, so there's nothing stereo about them. What are some other similarities? We've got some differences. We've got ring modulation on this synth. We've got the polymod section, which allows us to do filter FM as well as hard sync with the oscillators. So there's a whole bunch of like stuff gets different quickly. Let's go ahead and just check out the square wave real quick. So I can accomplish this just by hitting the membrane panel here. And let's check out the square wave. We'll go a little bit faster. Low end. Big difference. Try to get those in perfect tune. Pretty close. Again, kind of following the same trend where there's a little bit more brightness from the Prophet 600. Jerome, welcome to the stream. Prophet is not at 50%. Yes, I believe it is. You can hear that's just a little bit brighter once again. We're really hearing the entire frequency spectrum through this synthesizer. And Gleegly actually added a modification to this synth to sort of pull down the cutoff frequency to make it sound more vintage. I don't know why you would do that necessarily, because that's programmable stuff. I mean, when it comes to actual sound, I don't mind the fact that this thing gets brighter. But I think the difference too is just the character of the oscillators is different. And to answer your question, Dave, I think that the difference between it has a lot to do with gain staging and the way that they push those oscillators and sort of shape the EQ of those oscillators into the filter, because the filters should be identical, right? Let's discuss a couple of the things that are weird or different about these synths. So the first thing is that, and this would probably get points in favor of the Sequential Prophet 600, is we have a mixer here. So I can mix in a second oscillator directly. It's really clearly laid out: mixer, oscillator A and oscillator B. It's very nice. We have nothing like that on the Polaris. So even though we have two, the only way to hear one oscillator at a time is actually to take the pulse width of the pulse wave all the way through 0 to where it's off, which is kind of a bummer, because in that case, there's no way to mix the two oscillators. So in that case, you could hear that by... I'm actually just taking the pulse width all the way through 0. We could do the same thing with the pulse wave over here and take the pulse width through 0 and actually have the same effect, which is funny, but, you know, so right away, I would just say there's a clarity to the layout of the Prophet 600 that is missing from the Polaris. They definitely made a lot of choices with the Polaris. And for better or worse, you'll see as the stream continues, all of the ways that Fender, and it was designed by actually one of the guys from ARP. So for those of you guys who don't know, I believe it was Rhodes acquired ARP, and then someone acquired Rhodes, the same company that owned Fender. So this Fender Chroma Polaris was the only synth ever branded as a Fender synth, but it's still got some ARP DNA in it. And I think that's part of the difference of the sound too, is going for that sort of ARP Odyssey type sound, but in polyphonic, making a poly synth that sort of has that character. But anyways, so the oscillator section too is just much more simply laid out, where we've got a switch for sawtooth, square, and triangle. And what's interesting is that we can have all three of those wave shapes on at once on the Prophet 600. So that's the sawtooth wave, square, triangle wave, and we have no triangle wave on the synthesizer to use, the Chroma Polaris. Vincent, welcome to the stream. How's it going? It's true that the square coming from the Polaris sounds much more like a real clean square. Sounds like the 600 doesn't actually output a real 50%. Yeah, I don't know exactly. I don't actually know the answer to that. For me, I'm a very sound-oriented person. Sometimes the technical stuff goes a little bit over my head, so I apologize for that. Polaris was designed by Paul Di Rocca from ARP. He still supports the Polaris. Yeah, the Polaris is just a really incredible synth. And even though at first glance it might seem a little bit more esoteric or obscure, I actually think the Polaris might, at the end of the day, have the better interface, because it gives you control of a whole lot of stuff. And what it doesn't give you control over are emissions I don't find myself going too often. So I don't spend a whole lot of time mixing one oscillator lower than the other. Some of you guys might. You might start with like a triangle wave. So like first you could start with a triangle wave, but maybe you just want to mix in a little bit of sawtooth. Right? So that's kind of a cool sound. And that's just not even close to a sound you can do with the Polaris. We have no triangle wave and we have no way to mix oscillator. So right away, there's a bit of a difference. And another big thing we can do is have multiple waves on at the same time. So this is the saw and the square. And we can control the pulse width of the square wave in relation there. So we can get kind of interesting phasey type sounds. Right? That's kind of got a different character. Kind of like a hollow, buzzy. Versus how I turn that off. So it's a really interesting sort of sound to it that again, we don't have really that option over here. And another really great thing about the oscillators here is if my criticism of this, when I checked out this synth, I did a whole stream just on this synth, so you could go check that out on this channel as well. After you're done liking and subscribing to the channel, thank you very much. But one of the things I said was that I didn't feel like the oscillators were quite as beefy as I'd like them to be. So what you could do is, by adding a triangle wave to the other oscillators, it really does thicken up the sound. So here's the sawtooth again. Here's the sawtooth with a triangle wave. The thickness is pretty incredible. I've heard from a commenter who has an original Prophet 5 Rev 3 that the triangle mixes a little bit more here than it does on a Prophet 5. So take that with a grain of salt. Alan, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Alan says, interestingly, the 3374 produces a triangle wave, but the Polaris just leaves that pin unconnected. That is correct, actually. And that triangle wave can be used to be sent to the filter FM section. So another synthesizer that I've covered on this channel is like the Akai AX60, and that does use that. So it uses that to drive the filter FM. And the Pro 600 does have filter FM. Polaris doesn't, but it does have a ring modulator. So it's kind of interesting. The two of these are cool because they do have similar components inside, but as far as features, they're actually kind of different. Anyways, let's go talk about the oscillators over here. So interestingly, let's go back to the sawtooth wave. And you'll notice the sawtooth pulse width is sort of the inverse of the square wave. It's sort of like an octavey type thing. So these are wave shapes we can't get with the Prophet 600. And what I believe is going on is something like the subtraction of the square wave from the sawtooth wave. So this is a whole sonic palette that's not available. It's very different than the combination over here. So again, we have this interesting sort of character difference, and we can pulse width mod that sawtooth wave. So for a second there, if you had cut the stream off before I got over here, you might be thinking to yourself, well, the Prophet 600 just smokes the Polaris. But not so. We have some sort of interesting modulation. I don't want to exactly say it's saw width mod because, as you could hear, it's sort of an interesting subtraction process that happens to the sawtooth that sort of, in essence, kind of octaves it a bit. But you could get these beautiful... just gorgeous, lush tones out of it. And we don't really have that option over here on the Prophet 600. Of course, we can apply pulse width modulation to the square wave. We could do that on both of these synthesizers, but it's a different sort of sound. So it's interesting, this comparison. Already, it's for being almost as close as two synths could be in terms of their internal components. The sound couldn't be further apart, which I find shocking. Anyways, let's talk about the pulse wave. So I'm going to just zero out the pulse again and the pulse width modulation. And we will just pull up a pulse wave here. So we can kind of do a comparison. Now we can control the pulse width of both of these and both of these synths. Yeah, we can get these pretty much identical, right? Little differences, but yes, Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate you buying Diodes and Rust. That makes a huge difference to me. It makes a huge difference to me being able to take time off of work to be able to do this every Wednesday night. That is a thing, by the way, if you're watching this video in the future. I do a live stream every Wednesday night here on this channel, checking out different synthesizers. Sometimes they're new, a lot of the times they're vintage, and that's a fun thing. So we do have pulse width control over both of these synths, but where it gets interesting is probably more with the pulse width modulation. So and we can apply pulse width modulation with the LFO mod here. We just select pulse width A and B and go, and then increase the amount. So there is a difference. For one thing, comparing the two, this is interesting to me. I hope that's interesting to you guys. My ear hears that the Polaris has a more chorused sound to the modulation, and some of that might be due to the fact that Polaris actually has, I believe, a polyphonic LFO. And another interesting thing is if you listen to the pulse width modulation on the Prophet 600, you'll notice it sort of does a not perfect sine wave. Every other wave is a little bit brighter than the last one. So it's like, wow, wow. Like, that's terrible, but you know what I mean? Like, every other cycle is actually a little bit thinner over here. Hey Gerald, welcome to the stream. It's my saw width mod for sure. Yes, the PWM just has an interesting sort of sound to it, doesn't it, Paul? One thing that I think is a pro and a con, what I hear immediately from the Polaris is also, it's just a little bit more wild and untamed of a sound. It has a natural variance to it. The Prophet 600 is very clinical, which is good and bad, right? We love a good, clean synthesizer sound. Some of it is just that it's got more high end of that super high stuff. But doesn't it just have a little bit more of a... I would like to point out we're listening, it's just one oscillator. They both sound really lush with just one oscillator. I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know 100%, but it seems like when I break the chord up like that, you can hear that the LFOs aren't in perfect sync as it drives the pulse width modulation. Maybe I'm delusional. On this synth, it just sounds much more precise, much more clinical. Yes, and the top one does sound more lo-fi. It just doesn't push as much high end and pushes a lot more mid-range through. Yes, and Paul says he agrees that the pulse width mod sounds more chorusy. Yes, and the free-running polyphonic LFO just does add something here that's different than on the Prophet 600. So we've only been talking about oscillators, and we've only been talking about one oscillator so far. So why don't we get rid of pulse width mod on this and go back to the sawtooth on both synths. And the reason being, I want to check out the way that these synths handle detune, because there's a little trick up the sleeve of our friend, the Polaris. So let's go ahead and turn that off and move that up too, and we will turn up 2 sawtooths on both synths. So just kind of roughly the same settings. Pretty similar, right? Now it's sounding louder. Trying to volume match these so that I don't give a false impression of either synth. Listening to just the sawtooth oscillators on their own right here, I am impressed by the Prophet 600. It sounds more cinematic, more huge, especially with the way that Inktomi is adding a little bit of space to it. I think it sounds really great. But it's not as thick. So that's kind of the trade-off. You get the clarity and the brightness, but there's just a hugeness, a warmth to the Polaris. How's it going, Vulture Mom? Yeah, it's just an aggression of the Polaris. Prophet 600, more bright and more clinical again. So, which again isn't a bad thing necessarily, but it is a thing. But what's interesting is as we detune, so very gently or nicely, the Prophet 600, the layout's just so intuitive. I love the layout on the Prophet 600. We just have a fine-tune knob. We can control the frequency also in steps if we wanted. But for this example, we'll just pick a chord. Let's go D minor, and we'll just add some detune. So just a little bit of detune sounds really great. And yeah, just a really nice fatness. We could get it all the way to a really tight tune. But somewhere around there, it sounds really thick without the need to it's not getting pitchy at all. And these are voltage-controlled oscillators on both synthesizers. So in theory, there's going to be some drift and detune to the sound, even without the detune amount. And you could kind of hear that comparing it to some of the streams we've done with synths, like the SX240 up here or the JX3P over here. Those synths can get really in tight tune because they have digitally controlled analog oscillators. Jumping over to the Polaris, let's hear how the detune can sound. Wow, it's so thick. We can take it, it seems like a little further. Yeah, a little further on the Polaris. And you just hear more distortion, more grit, more anger in the sound of the Polaris. You can really hear that. On the sequential, it goes sharp a little faster. So this is one of those mysterious things about synthesizers that I don't fully understand. But there's something about detune. There's a little magic left in detune for me. How some synthesizers, the way that the oscillators drift in and out, they lend themselves to detune without getting pitchy or sharp sounding. And in this case, I can't seem to take it quite as far. It sounds like the Polaris can give me a little bit more. They're very similar, but I would say that the Polaris could take a little bit more detune and it still sounds really lush. I don't know, it's hard to say. It might be that it's actually slightly less detune on the Polaris, but there's a little bit more natural variance to the sound, whereas you really have to push the detune. Yeah, it's there. They both sound really great. It's just interesting to hear those little differences between these two synthesizers. I don't know. Does detune fascinate you guys as much as it fascinates me? For me, when we get into filters and everything, which we're about to talk about, by the way, it's a lot of fun. But the thing about detune is like I said, there's still a little bit of mystery in there for me. It's like, why does one synth detune better than another? Is fascinating to me. Anyways, why don't we discuss the filter real quick? So one of the differences of these two synths that's not how they left the factory is this is a Gleegly modified Prophet 600. And one advantage of that is it gets rid of the stepping of the filter. So both of these filters are analog filters. They're the exact same filter, the 3372, I believe, or 74. And I always get them mixed up. I think it's the 72. But what's interesting is that they have made it so that there's much, much better resolution on the modifier for the Prophet 600. Now, they both are smooth when they're being modulated by the envelope or the LFO. But in the case of the twisting the knob, you get a nice smooth control with the Prophet 600. And on the Polaris, we'll get stepped frequencies. Whoa, turn that noise off. It's probably not that noticeable, but with more resonance, let's crank them both up to about 50%. You'll definitely hear the difference. Sounds gorgeous, but we'll really hear it here. That's not that bad. That's actually really not that bad. If I crank the resonance to 75%. Actually, it's very smooth. I have a memory of that stepping, but it doesn't seem to be. Yeah, so you can hear that even though they have the exact same filter, they don't exactly give the exact same response. And again, I think that has to do with gain staging. Machine Storm, welcome to the stream. Yes, Paul, thank you for mentioning that. I meant to talk about that a second ago. But real quick, here's another thing about the detune. In the synthesizer, we can actually detune in the opposite direction on the synth. And that doesn't do what you might think, which it doesn't detune oscillator 2 downwards. What it does is it changes the way the detune works, or I guess essentially it applies key tracking to the detune. And what that means is that with normal detune, especially if I do a pretty good amount, you hear how there's a periodic nature to that detune. It almost sounds like a Hoover, but it's dun 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 dun. Right? Now, as I drop an octave, you'll hear that that detune beating is the technical word for that. Beating happens half the speed as an octave up. And we could do the same thing on this synthesizer too, by the way, if I just increase the detune. And then if I go down, and then down an octave again, it's very slow, and then up an octave, it's going to be twice as fast as the first note. Very fast, right? Very fast. What you could do, though, on the Polaris, which is super cool, is actually fix that beating across the keyboard. This is such a cool feature that you don't see on most synthesizers. So now you can hear that periodic beating again. When I go down an octave, and down an octave. So this detune is crazy. So essentially what's happening is as the voices go up, the detune is being scaled differently. So you can get really consistent detune across the key bed. And actually get rhythmic, if you want to go rhythmic with it. Like, say you like that, it doesn't matter where you play. right? You're going to get that sound. It's just a really cool feature. And that's part of what makes the Chroma Polaris detune sound so freaking good is, and I almost always use it in this mode if for no other reason than it's not common. It's just so stable across the whole synth. It's just really beautiful. To get a similar result, I mean, it's maybe not the most noticeable thing, but... It's what, to me, makes the Polaris sound like it has a chorus on it, even though there's no chorus on it. Whereas the Prophet 600 sounds more like a detuned synth. So anyways, that's just something worth talking about there. Steven, welcome to the stream. Yes, it does sound super crazy big. For this example, though, just to keep it fair, why don't we keep the detune similar? And we'll take the detune into similar territory. So just regular detune on the Polaris. Yeah, very similar sound, so we can actually compare the filter. So why don't we do back to a quick little filter sweep? We'll just do, it's just the standard thing, no resonance. And I'm gonna try not to talk in between comparing the two, so that you guys don't have something interrupt your brain's memory. Like your brain is like a goldfish when it comes to this shit, where it just forgets a sound previously. So I want to keep it really tight, and I'll give you my opinion after I've checked it out. It seems funny to be comparing the exact same filter on two different synths, but they do sound different, which is sort of blowing my mind or making me feel like, what do I even know about synths? Because, for instance, I've talked a lot about how the JX3P has the same filter as the Jupiter 8, but these two synths have the same filter, and they sure sound different. Like, blindfolded, I would think these have different filters. Anyways, let's crank the resonance up to about 50%. We'll do that on both synths. A little hard to tell. The knobs are easier for targeting values than these really beautiful. I mean, I love the look of the Polaris, but it's harder to target a value precisely. So one thing is we're going way up, right? We're going probably above 20 hertz, somewhere around here, around 6. Like, I can't hear the filter anymore. I don't know if some of you guys with like mosquito ears, like pristine, virgin, untouched, young ears can hear this frequency, but I can't. Till right about there, I'm hearing like, I don't know, I'm guessing 15K. High stuff, and that's at 6. So the range of the filter goes from 6 to 10 is all inaudible. Something to think about. Going back over to the filter of the Polaris. So I'll do one more filter sweep and then I'll give you my opinion, because I immediately didn't do what I said I would do. I talked in between, but I was just, had to say something. So Alan, it does seem to have more values than just 8, because you would definitely hear it if it only had the 8. Maybe that's only 8 that it can store in memory or something like that. I don't know. Hans Volt, welcome to the stream. How's it going, my brother? What's new? How's your fucking expander treating you? So what are my thoughts here? First off, I want to hear your thoughts. It's not just what I think about these synths, because there's been several times where I've actually been had the minority view about which synth sounds better. I'm thinking of the JP8000 versus the MS2000, and a couple of other synths where I was actually had the minority view. But what I'm hearing is that, of course, the filter goes a lot higher. Also, the way that filter moves feels more exponential in the Chroma Polaris. That is to say, you get more time pulling apart interesting harmonics with the Chroma Polaris. The filter seems more linear, so it gets out of that frequency range quicker with the but that's just, where you turn the knob to. It's not really something to make or break. But the biggest difference is just the resonance is a lot harsher, quicker on the Sequential Prophet 600. So I'm going to try to see maybe if I can find a frequency and match the two. We'll try to find that same frequency. So to get that sound, I need to dial the resonance back quite a bit. So that sounds pretty close to similar nasalness. So that's 50% or so on the Polaris. On the resonance for the Pro 600, we're about 3.5. So just keep that in mind. Let's take this one up to 7. And we'll bring the resonance up to about 7 here on the synth too. And we'll do another one. And I will try to shut up between the two. So, yes, the ear hurts, Dave. So immediately, one of the things you notice is that the Prophet 600's resonance is very ear-picky, which is crazy to me considering the Polaris has the same filter. Like, think about that. Like, why should we be hearing a difference? But we are. And again, I think it's just the way that the resonance is scaled. So we get to really high velocities quicker on the Prophet 600. Now, the Polaris sort of jumps in resonance right at the end, whereas we don't get a jump on the Prophet 600. Let's go ahead and find a frequency again. Sorry, Dave, you're going to have to cover your ears. This is not going to be a fun experience. We'd probably turn the volume down a bit. That way, so it's not as painful for everybody's buttholes, but I want you to look at this as the camera comes in. How little of a difference. Can you guys see that? Nothing's happening. On that knob, the difference between 6 and 7, or 6 to 10 is negligible. Yeah, about as soon as you hit 6.5 or so, that range between 6.5 and 10 is nothing happens. Hey, thanks for subscribing. Over here, you'll notice kind of a similar thing. We're going to find that frequency. And then it just jumps from a happy frequency to when it gets to what it's considering the top of the range here. We get full screaming resonance. What's interesting is actually at its highest value, it sounds like the Polaris right at the end jumps to a more intense resonance. And just listen to how much more gritty and distorted the Polaris sounds. And again, I don't know why. Yeah, so the resonance actually on the Polaris is stronger at its max value. But everything's shy of that. So, and it's nicely scaled so that as soon as it's only from like 9 to 10 that you hit this like crazy resonance that just comes out of nowhere. But the rest of the filter range is actually very nice. It just is, it sounds great. And what I think that is that's that last little bit, that last little digital value. It goes all the way. That way you could do filter tricks where you're using the filter as an oscillator actually. Let's see. Paul says that resonance actually has just woken my dog up. She's not pleased. I'm sorry. Can you please pet your dog for me and apologize? Todd says the Polaris has a Banshee thing going on in a good way. I agree. It definitely has a great sound. So let's go ahead and also do a little bit of a trick that I know you can do with the Polaris because we checked this out previously. What we can do is set the pulse width of both of these oscillators through 0. So we've moved it over to pulse and then taken the pulse width all the way through 0, and we should hear nothing. And that's because both oscillators are through 0. So there's no oscillator feeding the filter. We can do the same thing over here and turn the oscillators off on this synth. Oh, yeah, I have to turn the resonance down. And as soon as we're below self-oscillation, both synths, we're hearing nothing, right? Because there's no oscillator going through. What we can do, though, is take the cutoff all the way down and the keyboard tracking all the way up on both synths, increase the resonance all the way, and we'll just see what happens on both of them. Oh, I've got a little bit of, what is it? I might have to actually find the pitch with this. I can't remember. Oh, so maybe on the Polaris it's 50%, the key tracking? Yeah, I think it's 50%. And then we can get rid of that. And now we're hearing just the filter of the Polaris. Let's add some release to that sound. And so we're just playing the filter, and that's, I think, why the filter has this crazy resonance right at the end, is so that you could do this type of thing. Let's see if that's possible on the Pro 600. I haven't tried this yet. Let's add some release as well. So it seems like we have to tune this differently. Wow, it's just like so much more anger to it with the Polaris. You can really hear that distortion. It's very clean on the Prophet 600, so interesting little difference. Oh, it's gorgeous on both. But you could hear how much more they pushed that filter. It's crazy. Oh. So they're both gorgeous in their own unique ways. Like Regal is saying, by the way, welcome to the stream, Regal. How's it going? The resonance is much more like the Poly 6 in distortion. Yes, I agree with that. It almost sounds like you're running it through a fucking distortion pedal. And that's with the volume at 50%. There could be something hidden inside of it. So like maybe if I move this volume knob, bring that down by the volume up. Oh, that is it. So what I guess you could do is control the volume here. So by the way, this is one of the biggest differences is the Prophet 600 hides some of its stuff under a menu system. The Polaris actually uses this 16 membrane button assignable switch. So you've got hands-on control over everything you need, but 16 things you don't use as often you can use over here. So this is fascinating to me that by dialing the volume back, you can clean that distortion right up. So we actually do have a way to clean that up, which is super interesting. Garen, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Looking at the schematics for the two synths, and while I'm able to use the same filter chip, the control circuits around the filter chips are wildly different. I'm guessing that you're biasing the filters differently, hence they sound different. As soon as you use a word like bias, that goes over my pretty little head where I'm like, I don't understand what biasing a filter means, but it sounds good, and I have a feeling they did it. Vincent says the Chroma's final output stage gets distorted, not the filters themselves, since it only distorts more when you play multiple notes. There you go. Yeah, so it's a super interesting thing that you can actually drive the VCAs of the Polaris really hard, like crazy hard. I mean, the difference of how nice that is. It's like, that's probably a big part of where the Polaris gets its attitude from, is just the distortion that you can drive this thing. But it's nice to know you actually can clean it up. So if you're looking at buying one of these, you know now that you don't have to be afraid necessarily and thinking to yourself, oh my God, this thing's just always going to sound like a ripping Banshee. It's like, no, it actually can sound really pretty clean, surprisingly. Dave says, can synths be run through pedals like guitar pedals? You absolutely can. I've done it before. I've done it on this stream, so you can do that, and it's a good idea. Garen says you need to be careful about the levels into the pedals. Yes, that is a thing, but I haven't had too much trouble with it. You still get a difference to the filter though, don't you? I'm almost hearing like a square wave level harmonics in there, whereas this is just super clean. This more sine wave. This has a little harmonic in there. Yeah, it's just darker overall. So, I mean, how often do you really use this sound? For me, not very often at all, but it is there. Here's one more thing to talk about is we do have a noise source on the Chroma Polaris. So we can turn this into sort of a windy MS2000B has a patch called Ice Fields that I love. Listen to how fucking gorgeous that sounds. So that's something just super incredible and gorgeous sort of sound you could get out of the Polaris that's not possible over here on the Prophet 600. Let's turn the resonance way down, increase the cutoff, and the oscillator stuff. And let's create actually a different type of sound. Let's go for something like a brass type of sound. And that'll be an interesting comparison, and also some maybe reveal to us some of the things that's going on with the envelopes as well as the just the way that these synths are. So Going over the amplifier, I'm just going to bring the the release to about 50%. Sustains all the way up, attack and decay don't matter. In the case of the filter, I'm going to bring it up to 50, 50, 50, 50, right? So this might not be a good brass sound, but it's something close to it. We have to bring the cutoff down, of course. No resonance. And then increase the envelope amount. And so that's how the filter sound at 50%. This is going to get interesting. Same idea over here. We will bring the resonance all the way down. I'm going to bring the envelope depth all the way up. By the way, keyboard tracking's all the way up on both of these. Now we have two different envelopes here, and it's worth talking about some of the differences. First off, we have what's called fixed or touch, but essentially what that does is it allows this synth to respond to velocity. Chroma Polaris actually can respond to polyphonic aftertouch over MIDI, which is crazy, and I don't know how to do it yet. I need to set my Ensoniq SQ80 up to try to make that happen. Haven't tried it before, but that's a thing you could do. But the biggest difference here, as far as control and expression goes, is actually that this synthesizer has no velocity. Just like a Prophet 5, a Jupiter 8, an Oberheim OBXA, many of the classic synths from the 70s and 80s did not have velocity, and neither does the Prophet 600. Chroma Polaris does. Something to talk about. We'll get to that in a second. But let's set the decay. So we only have attack, decay, release instead of attack, decay, sustain, release. And the way this works is that if the decay is at 100%, sort of like how the resonance just jumped into full self-oscillation, decay jumps into full sustain. If it's not that way, the volume envelope will always sustain. The sustain's always 0. So if I bring this down to, even like 75%, you'll hear nothing at all. Oh, I need to turn the sawtooths on. It'll always decay to 0. Takes a while though, right? That's a long decay time. If I turn that all the way up though, we end up with having it all the way up. So the full sustain, essentially. So it's another smart way that I think that Paul Du Roca, Rocca, I'm not sure how to say his name, but designed the synth where they could save money on one fader and just have the decay alternate between 0 sustain and 100% sustain if you have it all the way up. Torben, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Yes, they are all filter. All of the chips in these synths are Curtis. I believe they both share 3372 Curtis filter and amplifier. So the filters and amplifiers are the same. Oscillators are different. There's 3374 dual VCOs in the Polaris, and they are 3340 single VCOs in the Prophet 600. And all of this stuff makes a difference. Shockingly, you could hear a difference in the filter, even though it's the exact same filter. So then let's do the exact same thing. We will set everything to 50% or so on the Polaris, and you'll hear that it's massively different versus. So what's happening here? Let me actually find the frequency like I did. So what I'm trying to do is sounds like we need to increase the detune just a little bit more. We'll use the cool chorus detune and then increase the filter depth. So the envelopes you can hear are much slower at 50% than they are on the Prophet 600. And obviously the filter goes a lot higher. So that's something to talk about. So it sounds like Paul is talking about the ADS SDR envelope is excellent for piano and percussive type sounds. It would have been wonderful if both the Polaris envelopes had that format instead of one being ADR. Yes, I agree with that. But as far as it goes, Paul, I actually think that it's a good compromise because you have more control of shaping the sound of the filter envelope, which is where a lot of the magic happens on the Polaris. So let's just talk about that briefly. I did do an entire stream on the Polaris, so I'm not going to try to cover everything as in depth as I did on that stream. But essentially, we've got attack, decay, sustain, release. You guys know what that is. Then we have sustain, decay. And this is interesting. So sustain decay is another stage. And so unlike on the Prophet 600, where the sustain is always just going to be whatever you set it to, the sustain further decays to 0. So you'll go up the attack stage, down the decay stage to the sustain level, and then that will decay to 0. And the sustain decay is actually the time variant, how long it takes. So it's a lot like decay in the sense that it's a time factor, not a level factor. And so that's what's happening here. So you can technically get more complex shapes out of the Polaris than you can. But there is something to be said for the simplicity of ADSR, right? There's a reason that has stayed around and this sort of thing has not. So let's try to match I like how, let's try to first just match we'll turn the sustain up all the way on both, and we'll just try to match the cutoff of the envelope amount. So you can hear, even though the sustain's all the way up, the sustain decay is still decaying. By the way, if I turn that all the way up, it too will act like the decay stage of the volume envelope and stay all the way up. So what's interesting here is I have the envelope depth all the way up on the Chroma Polaris, right? To get to those frequencies. Listening to the envelope depth on the Prophet 600, I'm only going up plus of the +5 envelope amount that I have, I'm only using plus 1.5. And you'll notice how much more release we have. So I'm just going to try to match that. And you'll notice even at like 8 release, it's still got a much shorter release. So somewhere around 8 sounds like about 50% on the Polaris. Yeah, that's about right. We also have to slow down the attack, right? Maybe not that slow. This is where the Prophet 600 really gets at me. And I know the Gleegly mod affects this so you can have more exponential envelopes. I'm not sure if that defaults to that. Someone who's a Prophet 600 knowledgeable person, either leave a comment or in the chat if now that it's modified what the default envelopes are. But maybe just slightly less time. But yeah, it's finicky. It's touchy quickly. That's pretty close. The decay time, I need to decrease the decay. Or sorry, the decay is really fast. It's like one of the only synths I know where the decay seems to be faster than the attack stage. Try to get that sort of shape. Yeah, so it's very interesting. Hey, thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate that. Dave says, did you hear about Behringer and Vladimir Kuzmin collabing on a Polyvox? Yes, I did. That's very exciting. Let's see here. Torben says, complex envelopes were a big thing in the 80s, but no one liked to program them, including myself. When I did the tutorial on the Roland D50, I had to get good. And now I feel much more comfortable with them, but for a while, they too stressed me out. Yes. So Todd, the breakpoint parameter on the DW8000 or 6000 is the same thing. So that's the time factor as opposed to the sustain level. So it's the same, or actually, no, what is it? It's different on the DW8000. I have it printed right here. Let me see what it is. If I can find it real quick. It is the slope is the time, I believe, that it takes to get there. Anyways, that doesn't really matter. You'll notice, I hope you'll notice, I don't know if you guys are hearing the same thing I'm hearing, but just how freaking good the envelopes and the shapes, it's like everything in the Polaris is tuned very well. So let's tighten that up a little. Let's get more of like a... Like how great that sounds. Let's try that same thing. One thing you'll notice is the scoop on the Polaris, how we're starting from like nothing. It's a different sort of shape to that envelope. And I get what people were complaining about with the Prophet 600 when they talk about this. Rich, welcome. Yes, this is an emergency broadcast. How's it going? Econ, welcome. How's it going? Welcome to the stream. Yes. So the thing is that you'll notice that it's actually difficult to match the two, and it's a bit of a shame because you could get there on both. Remember, there's no resonance on either sound. It just sounds so freaking good on the Polaris. And I mean, this is subtle stuff. It's not... You know, it's not the end of the world, but a lot of these things start to add up eventually. I mean, just like how huge and cinematic the Polaris sounds. So I guess that's what I'm trying to get to is like, once you start adding up all of the components, you start to have this feeling of like, why is the Polaris working so well and the Prophet 600 not quite as much? I don't know. But we could cover a couple of things that I think the Prophet 600 really excels at that I wish we had on the Polaris. And the biggest one would be in the polymod section. We have control of a couple of things. One is we can do filter FM, which is my favorite thing. So we've got a brass sound, and now we can do the POB brass, dirty brass sound. So all we have to do is pick a destination. So in this case, we'll send the oscillator B to the filter. This is that triangle wave. And right now, it kind of sounds like it's just making the filter brighter. Just seems to increase the filter cutoff point, which is really fascinating. But until you add resonance, you're not really going to hear it. So I'm going to add a lot of resonance. It does sound really good, actually, with like resonance 5 or less. I really... That analog resonance is just so good. dirty sort of, just what I love. It reminds me actually of the Insonic SQ80, which is kind of a funny thing to compare it to, but the truth is that I love the way that filter sounds. It's another Curtis filter, and yeah, this is just so... Sounds really great. Let's go ahead, while we're here, why don't we increase the resonance? Interesting, the difference there, isn't it? For this type of sound, I think the Prophet 600 is smoking the Polaris. Increase the release. That's the trick, is the release. Yeah, it's just really... freaking good on the Prophet 600, which is really phenomenal. Paul says there's a UVI sampled VA called the Chroma. Yes, that is sampled from this baby, of course. But take it from me, it's not very good at all. Compared to an actual Polaris, is very weak. That's a shame, unfortunately. Yes, cranking the VCA helps a lot on Jerome. I agree with that. So... I did see his video, his channel was up again, Torben, because he was in one of Matt Wright's most recent videos, but it was like a new channel. That guy's crazy. I don't know what he's doing. Garrett says, one thing that might help the Polaris outperform the 600 is the microprocessor. It's a significantly better chip. Yeah, that probably is the case. Yes, but the Gleegly one increases that. Jesus, welcome to the stream. Is there such a thing as a budget Titan synth? Because these are the budget versions after all. Wait. Is there such a thing as a budget Titan? Because these are the budget versions after all. Well, these are the two cheapest 2 VCO vintage synthesizers you can get, right? I don't know if everybody believes me when I say that, but go ahead and look on Reverb and try to find a cheaper 2 VCO vintage synthesizer. These are the 2 cheapest. The next step up is something like a Jupiter 6 for around $6,000. In the vintage world, 2 VCOs just costs a lot. But these 2 synths are still very reasonably priced at $1,600 and about $1,200. I'm sorry, $2,100 right now. Anyways, what I wanted to talk about was Filter FM. So... Yeah. So sorry, I got a little lost there. It's just so much fun to play with Filter FM. Crystal Lab, welcome to the stream. Lionel, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Brett, how's it going? Welcome, everybody. Bobby, welcome to the stream. How's it going, everybody? Tronic, welcome to the stream. Yes, there are some aces to play. Paul, have a wonderful night, okay? Todd says the Polaris seems similar to the Matrix 6. I will be shooting out the Oberheim Matrix 6 against the Prophet 600 in the near future, probably within the month or so. I want to shoot this synth out against a bunch of them. But anyways, I just want to highlight real quick how cool Filter FM is. The Oberheim can do it, the Polaris can't. So that's one area where the Polaris sort of loses some points, right? It sounds great. I mean, listen to the chewiness. Let's slow the decay really slow and see if we can hear the stepping. So one thing about the Polaris to me that I hear when I screw around with it, I feel like I can hear the stepping in the envelope, but I don't know if I'm going crazy. So you guys can help me determine if I'm losing it. Spoiler is I'm losing it, but maybe not because of this. What do you guys think? Am I losing my mind? I feel like I'm losing my mind. Cygnus, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Which synth do you suppose has the lesser reputation of the two? Coming from someone who doesn't know a thing about these synths, I would say the Prophet 600 has a bad rep. It's sort of like the Alpha Juno or a few other synths where it came out and it was perceived as a more budget version of the Prophet 5. The Prophet 5 Rev 3 already had a little bit of a negative reputation because of the Curtis chips for sounding cold. And so the Prophet 600 sort of continued that legacy in a not so great way. Another thing is that it had a stepping filter, which is remedied by the Gleegly mod, and the envelopes were simply not the thing is that this has digitally controlled amplifiers in it, the amplifier for the filter and for the amp. And so that little processor they put in there, I think it was a Z80. I think Todd was saying earlier, or was it Paul? One of the two of them was saying it was a Z80, but whatever it was, the processor just couldn't handle it. And so the amplifiers were not very good. One of the things is the release on the Prophet 600, it like sort of like drops off all of a sudden, almost like a 909 crash sample. So I'd say the Polaris, if for no other reason, then it didn't come out with that sort of like reputation, that like yolk hanging over its neck. The Polaris also followed the Rhodes Chroma, which is one of the most revered vintage synths of all time. This is the cut down version, but for some reason people don't really look at it as being a lesser synth. But they are very similar, Cygnus, so I don't want to necessarily steer anything either way. Brett points out this has the ring mod. I'm about to get there, my friend. Cygnus loves a bad rep synth. I certainly am too. I mean, I think the Alpha Juno has the worst rep and is one of the best sounding vintage synths out there. Yes, it is a Z80 in the Prophet 600. It was Garen who was saying that. Sorry, I apologize. let's talk about, in this case, the ring modulator. Oh, we do have sync in the Chroma Polaris. I'm sorry, I said we didn't earlier, but we do. So just be aware of that. The LFO mod is interesting too, because, so, okay, there's too many things to talk about. Let's just talk about let's go back and do some ring mod stuff. So clicking ring mod on will give you the addition and subtraction between the two oscillators. And now I'm just hearing that. So you can hear that, I guess it's like kind of the pulse waves. Ring mod off is just kind of typical, and then ring mod on. I'm not really hearing too much of a difference because the two oscillators are very similar to each other. Let's screw that up. Let's take the transpose feature. So it's an interesting way of doing this. When you hit the transpose button, you just press a key and that transposes it to that. So if I set it to a fifth, a high fifth, now we'll have something very different. Wow. So let's kill the resonance and increase the cutoff just so we could kind of hear. Oh, and I had set the sweep to square there accidentally at some point. I must have hit it. So you can hear, wow, I mean, just talk about like some really dissonant, chaotic sounds. If we transpose this pretty high and we pick a weird value, like just off, we could get some truly destructive. Kind of pretty up there, but down here, we're like in true hell. As far as sonic mayhem goes, which is perfect timing for Dub Station 0 to be back. But we could... What we could do with this is actually use a very thin amount of that to create sort of like a tine for an E-piano sound. There's like a nice note kind of in there. So if we bring the cutoff down, get this really freaking crazy. Really different sort of sound than your... Beautiful up there. Let's transpose it again and just pick a more reasonable note. So I transpose them both to the same note, or we could go... transpose it to a fifth, and now it's really kind of nice. Yeah, so really interesting sorts of sounds we could get, but there's no way to really adjust or screw with the filter in the same way that we can with the Prophet 600. It just happens to be that sort of a way. No cheers tonight, Jerome. I actually don't have an alcoholic beverage with me, but I did earlier in the stream. I'm sorry. I missed you on that one. Let's see here. Or even use envelope on the pitch. Yeah, so that's another thing we could do, by the way, worth talking about. So we can apply an envelope to the pitch of both the Prophet 600 and the Chroma Polaris. And the way by doing that on the Prophet 600, let's go ahead and see where we're at here. Got a lot of craziness going on. So if we want to adjust in the polymod section, the filter envelope, we can apply it to the frequency of oscillator A. Yeah, so right there at the end, it got into tune. Very similar sort of way to do things over here on the oscillator. So if I go to envelope, what is it? PWM? That's not how I want to do it. There's a way to do this. Oscillator to envelope. Here we are. So if we go here, and this is in the assignable control, we should now be able to adjust. We could really get into, you know, really bizarre. This sounds different with the ring modulator off. It's going to just sound more, right, more standard. But with that on, we get into this like really crazy atonal stuff. And you'll notice that we could take the oscillator the opposite direction. Which actually sounds really great. Different sort of timbre, and this is also where being able to key track the detuning as opposed to just standard detuning on the Prophet 600 gets really interesting, because detuning through a ring modulator sort of metallic, crazy sounds in there. Garen says, because I like going down rabbit holes, looking at the 3340 datasheet, the Polaris copied the example circuit for the filter where Sequential tweaked the design significantly. That's super interesting. Tronic says, for me, VCO are more desirable than hardware EGs, given you usually have to choose one in my price range. Well, so these are both VCO synths. So, and they're kind of in similar price range. Today I found one of these for $1,600 and Chroma Polaris 2 on Reverb for $2,100. So those are the two cheapest I could find today. Of course, if you're not watching this video live, those prices will be different. But yeah, so there's, you know, no way to do filter FM, but there is the ring modulator. So there's sort of like, again, we kind of get to this place where there's like advantages and disadvantages for both. This has a really deep sequencer. This has a sequencer and an arpeggiator. This has no arpeggiator. I'm trying to think if there's any other like major differences or things that are missing. We already talked about how the noise is different. No filter FM. We have different LFO shapes. So we could do reverse ramps and stuff like that. And on the Polaris, we really don't have that option. So I'm going to turn the ring mod off. I'm going to turn oscillator. and get the detune more under control, because the detune's really out. It's more, because ring mod will force it to be more in tune, weirdly. So we're back to a very beautiful Polaris type sound. Right? Let's turn the volume down a bit too. Oh, that's a volume pedal. Let's turn that off. Oh, I actually think I tuned before the stream this synth to this synth, and I think this synth was transposed someplace else, so let me just fix that real quick. There we go. So they're back in a relatively sound about right. There we go. They're about right there. Yeah, there's so much stuff on the Polaris, like the fact that certain assignable control stuff is unipolar and other things are bipolar. You can tell, I don't know how well you guys can see it on stream, but all of these, for instance, are unipolar. They have more blue and more concentrated teal towards the top. But if you look over at the pulse width mod, lost the microphone. Whoa, dude. Chaos reigns. Lost the microphone. If you look over here at pulse width mod, I'll see if you guys can see that. It's unipolar, so it's got teal towards the top and the bottom, at black in the middle. And the assignable control is both ways. It's on the left, it's black at the bottom, and in the right, it's black at the middle. So it's interesting. Same thing with the sweep depth. You can force the LFO to go down, or positive or negative. I don't think that's possible here. I think the LFO is only going positive in the Prophet 600. So there's little differences like that I don't think make or break the thing. I want to do one more sound probably. If anybody has a type of sound that they would like to hear me make on either of these two synths, now would be a great time, because I do want to share or show one more thing about the synths and the way that things kind of come together that I haven't yet. But this would be a great time if anybody has a type of sound they'd like for me to try to make on both synths. Sometimes that's a really great way to be able to, pull apart the differences of synths. Is not so much just, we've, up to this point of the stream, we've been really focused on the individual components like the oscillators and the filters and the specific things. But one of the ways you can really pull apart a synth is when you try to put it all together, those differences become more apparent. So I see you saying, Torben, going for a synth bass, which is great. But if anybody else has an idea, go ahead, throw it in. I've done synth basses before. If anybody else has anything cool. I just need to drink a little bit of hydration here. Okay, so we've got a few things. So Torben says a synth bass. DJ Crystal Love, my friend, says a sweet ethereal chord. And Regal says go Hans Zimmer in Blade Runner 2049. So we could probably do all three of those. But I think it'll be fun to do, start with the good old bassline sound. So we're going to leave the sustain all the way up for both of these and turn the release all the way down. And we will bring the sustain all the way down as well. So we're going to create a pluck. And we'll use square waves for this one. Just for this example, because we've been using sawtooth waves. And we will get the tuning really tight. Maybe not perfect tight, right? That sounds really good. And then let's just bring the cutoff down, pick a low frequency. Let the rumble through, right? Okay, so now what we've got is another thing that might be helpful is actually disabling key tracking. So that's a pretty good sort of growly, kind of plucky, Reese-y bass line. Let's see if we could get there with the Prophet 600. You can get very tight envelopes here. On the Prophet. It seems like we get just as tight. A little bit more resonance. It actually seems like it's passing a little bit more low end here, which is pretty cool. I've got to do the Zeppelin All of My Love lead. I've got to learn that one. I've got to figure out how to really nail it on one of these synths. Rich says Universe by the Korg M1. That should be easy. Yes, we just need a rain stick and we'll be able to make that happen. Terminator 1 by Brad Fidel. That's another good one I need to learn. It was originally on an OBXA, interesting tronic, and a Prophet 10. Very cool. Yeah, the sequential seems to have more low end. So what's interesting about the Polaris, and I've said this before, the Polaris is very mid-rangey. It's a very mid-rangey synth. And in this case, I would say that the Prophet 600 kind of is smoking it. I think that it sounds better for that type of sound. Kind of like it did the sweeping resonance pad better, but the Polaris kind of sounds better usually with the cutoff all the way up. It sounds more like a sawtooth, doesn't it? Yeah, I think it just sounds more sawtoothy on the Prophet 600 as well. Just so much more bright. I know something in the mid-range is different for sure too, which is super interesting. Anyways, going back, let's go for a sweet ethereal chord, and we'll go ahead and call it, we'll do the sweet ethereal chord and the Blade Runner at the same time maybe. So we'll go for, let's go ahead and put these into saw width mod mode and see what we could get done here. We can go positive with one width mod and negative with the other. Not that that's a huge difference. We get real nasty, right? Sounds like the cutoff is just not going as high. Oh, I see. The keyboard tracking is actually darkening the sound at the bottom, which makes sense. We can actually do that in reverse, which we can't do on the Prophet 600. So it's another little subtle thing. But we can actually get the synth on the Polaris to be brighter as we go down and then darker as we go up. Thank you, Brett. I appreciate it. Tony, welcome to the stream. How's it going? So yeah, this is actually a really interesting thing we can do with the Polaris that we can't do, which is get darker up top, which I actually think sounds great because I love big, bright, horrible nastiness at the bottom. And then as you go higher, I actually like it to get smoother sometimes. It depends on the type of sound, right? So for this, we're going to add some release to both of the stages. So we could sort of get, it's, you know, it's a little Terminator, isn't it? Let's add some attack and decay. Right? So now we can go. Just sounds so good. Yeah, just really great. So we could do, by the way, we could do envelope pulse width modulation on the Polaris. Again, I think I covered most of this stuff more on the stream with the Polaris. So if you're excited about the Polaris, just go watch that stream. But what that can allow you to do is those really cool Matrix 6 sort of plucky string type sounds. But we're not going to do that. We didn't cover hard sync. It's a thing on both of the synths. Again, I've done a stream on both of them individually, so if you're interested in hard sync, right now we're going sort of with Regal and DJ Crystal Love's combination of sounds of an ethereal chord and Hans Zimmer Blade Runner 2049 sound, overdriven sawtooth pad, that's sort of Jerome's sort of a thing that we were going for. We can apply velocity, actually, we haven't been using. To both of the envelopes or just one, so we could play a chord kind of quietly, you know, do a little ninth chord type thing. What would that be? Wow, I'm barely hearing anything. Right? And if I hit hard? It's in there, I think, because of the negative key tracking. I've found that if you use, because the velocity is either on or off, and it's strong, I think on the Polaris, I'd either choose one or the other and not both. And in this case, it seems because of that negative key tracking, the volume envelope is probably the better place. So quietly, we could go, and then hard. Pretty big difference right there. Anyways, let's go try to create something similar on the Prophet. create some pulse width modulation here. And you'll notice the decay, it's like you've really got to set it long. Oh, the amplifier needs to go up. Pulse width modulation, it's very, very powerful. If we go back to sawtooth waves, it's much clearer, isn't it? This sounds so nasty on the Polaris. One thing, let's talk about this real quick. I'm going to increase the attack all the way, and I want you to pay attention to something. It's weird. It's like you're always hearing it, and if I dial that back a little, I'm going to turn the attack off, the filter all the way off, just so I can make my point here a little bit more. So now, attack off on both. What you would expect, 50%? Very quick. Let's go 7.5. See how you're still hearing the front of the sound? I don't know what the hell that is, but like you're still hearing that little volume gate issue there, but takes a bit to get there, but you still, it seems like it doesn't go all the way to 0 or something until you push it really far. Like, notice how quickly like how much dexterity I have with that, with the attack almost all the way up, whereas here, I'm like, I'm not getting anything. So the envelopes, especially the attack stage, is much better on the Polaris, where you can really get a nice slow sound, and we can take that to an extreme if we wanted to go real crazy with it, you know, and go. See how long it took for that high note to get in there? Yes, Nick. So the Gleegly has different settings. And I believe if I just go into, it's over here. It's in here. Amplifier, amp shape. So I've got amp shape and fast. And so if I go to slow, let's see if that changed anything real quick. Seems like it did. See, it's like sometimes you still get though. See what I mean? All the way up. This is all the way up. So this is the speed from fast. And then slow. There it goes. I'm not getting that note at all anymore. What's the toggle knob? Yeah, so it's fast to slow. I don't know. It's just like, why am I hearing that at slow with the knob all the way to slow and then the slowest possible attack? I don't know. It's very strange to me, and maybe I'm just missing something, so hopefully some Gleegly master can come around and show me like what I'm doing wrong, but it seems like it doesn't go all the way to 0 or something like that. which is a shame because it's very easy to get these sorts of beautiful evolving sounds. I mean, like, look at how long it took for that note to get there. The low end just came right in, though. I guess it's because of the key tracking, right? Change the setting, then turn attack knob all the way forward and backward. Okay, so I'm going to change the setting to fast, and then change it to slow, attack all the way forward, and attack all the way back, and let's see if we can get a nice sound out of this. Okay, now I'm really hearing nothing. Tried maybe not quite as much. See what I mean? Like, it just sometimes... It's like it's there, and it does get louder, but... Wait, do you see what's happening with the amplifier? Yeah, just super weird. I don't know what causes that. And then just let's do it again. Speed all the way to the left. I think this is more of an exponential shape. And then all the way to left. It just never seems to go like completely away. You know what I mean? Like, I just can't start with no amplitude. It's just so weird to me. Maybe the synth has an issue. Maybe the Gleegly mod got messed up. I don't know if I need to redo the firmware or whatever. But anyways, like, compare that to just the Polaris with the attack all the way up. Exactly what you're expecting. Yeah. And one more thing I wanted to focus on. So let's go ahead and add some, let's move these over to pulse waves so we get pulse width modulation. We'll just... So setting it both so we don't go through zero. It sounds really big. I mean, listen to just how cinematic that sounds. Right? Super cool. Then, if we add some sweep depth, actually, to the cutoff, so now we're going to have some of that happening. I'll bring the attack down a bit, too. So you can hear how musical the LFO works in here. That's all of that polyphonic free-running LFO where we get these really interesting, weird... Just totally different sound, right? Very unique and interesting. Now let's go over to the Prophet 600 and hopefully this will highlight another little gripe I have. So we'll go back to pulse width modulation. I I mean, it's not that the Prophet 600 can't sound great, because it does, but that whatever's going on with the amplifier is just super weird to me. So we've got some really cool pulse width mod, but let's say now what we want to do is less of the envelope like we did over here. We turn that down, and what we want to do is use the LFO and send it to the filter. You'll notice something. The way that the filter is scaled, or the way that the LFO is scaled to the filter, I have the same issue with how the CS70M, which is the $20,000 synth, so it's not the end of the world, but it is a thing where you'll notice that there's, to the same initial amount knob, or the amount that you're sending, to get good pulse width modulation, you can't use that much. So to get sort of Polaris-esque sounds, I'm using like 3.5. Getting very different sounds over here, of course. But if we're listening to the pulse width mod, so I'm going to turn that off from the filter and open the filter all the way up, we're barely getting any pulse width modulation, right? We're just getting, I want a lot more to get to that sort of like the Polaris area. We need like 6.5 or I'm at 7 right now. That's about what the Polaris sounds like. Similar pulse width mod amounts, I've got to use about 6.5 here, but to get similar filter amounts, I need to use something more like 3. Maybe even less. No, it does sound good, right? I mean, it doesn't sound bad. But when you add everything together with the Chroma Polaris, yeah, I mean, I think that's where you can really hear where Paul DeRocca, or Rocca, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, what an incredible job he did with the Polaris, where little things, that's a very subtle thing that you wouldn't necessarily catch if you're just like turning on a synth and checking it out by itself. You'd be like, oh, that LFO sounds great, and it does. But there's this way in which the Polaris has a lot of really smart stuff going on under the hood that you don't necessarily catch on your first glance. So yeah. Alan says, can you calibrate the volume offset of the Prophet 600? I know you can on the Chroma Polaris, and the envelopes don't behave correctly before it's calibrated. Volume offset. Yeah, I probably could. I've run this thing through a bunch of tuning and calibrations, trying to fix one of the voices that was out a little bit. That could be something I check out and see if there's a way to do that, because that could be what's causing it. Let's see. It could very well be, and that would, if that fixes it, I will leave a comment on this video and say, yes, you know, that was my error. And that's of course always the case with when we're checking out two synths, is it could just be my error. different sort of sound. That doesn't mean that the LFO can't be used. You just have to use a very small amount. I mean, that's a beautiful sort of sound that you can't really get out of the Polaris either. Well. Yeah. So very, very interesting. All right. So I think that's a good place to call it for tonight. I would love to ask you guys, though, of the two, if you could have either of these two synthesizers, what do you think you would go for? What do you think the synth would be for you? Let's go ahead, and I'm going to drop that into that. Mark says, Offsex, do you have a Sysx video? My Kwai K5M is being a pain, trying to back up patches to put new ones on. Sys6, is that different than Sys-X? I don't have a video on either. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the chat here. Start a poll. Polaris or Prophet? Which would you prefer? Or let's go with the Chroma worth. Is the Polaris worth $500 more? And then we'll go yes or no. It's the interesting question for me. It's not always the question isn't does something sound good, because a lot of these synths sound great. And even since like the Kwai K5, for instance, is not considered like everybody's favorite synth, but I think they sound great. I really love the K1. Hopefully we'll have a K4 to check out at some point soon. A lot of people are going with the Polaris in the chat so far. Dubstation Zero is Team Knobs, so that would be the probably Team, what is the word? Prophet. I'm losing it. Oh, yes. So let's see how it's going here. 6 votes, 67 to 33 right now. We'll give you guys a couple of seconds to get the remaining votes in. I don't know. What do you guys like or dislike about either synth? I want to hear what you guys have to say. What are your opinions on both of them? And is there anything that is, for instance, is there anything on one or the other synth that for you is a deal breaker? You're like, it doesn't have an arpeggiator. Oh, it doesn't have noise, right? It doesn't have ring mod, right? It could kind of go back and forth with these two synths. So I'm just curious, what do you guys think? Brett says the Polaris isn't that good looking like the Prophet, though. I don't know. I like the look of the Polaris myself, but I know my taste isn't for everybody. Like, I like the look of the Moog Source, but a lot of people hate that way that synth looks. Todd says maybe Polaris paired with a Behringer Pro 800 module. A lot of people have been asking me to do a comparison between the Pro 800 and the Pro 600, or the Prophet 600. It's not the Pro 600, it's the Prophet 600. And I would like to do that. I don't want to spend $400 on a synth I'm not going to use. I know I have thousands of dollars worth of synths behind me, so that might sound strange, but it's just the truth. If I can borrow one from someone in my area, that would be different. So I'm hoping I can find somebody, but because I keep saying that, like, hey, Starsky Carr did a really good comparison video between the Prophet 600 and the Pro 800. So I recommend you guys to go check that out if you are interested in the differences, and there are differences, which isn't to say that the Behringer one doesn't sound really good. But, you know, people have still been saying like they want me to do it. And maybe that's because I have a little bit of a different approach than Starsky does. I love his videos though, so I highly recommend that. And you know, but I don't know. It's, for me, like comparing the Behringer, I guess I would do it if it was around though. So maybe we'll see if it's possible. Rich says, you don't have to get involved here, but I want to make sure you got my email from the contact us on your website. I'll go check that out, Rich, okay? I might have missed that. I apologize. Walter says, I wish I could send you my Kawai MM16 for editing on the K1, K4. Yes, I've thought about that. I need to get that. But they do have programmers, I think, right? Garrett says, I'd like to hear a Polaris with the filter modded to exactly match the Prophet 600. That'd be interesting. It'd be very interesting. I like the sound of the Polaris. I'd be terrified to modify mine. Maybe a switch under the hood I could be okay with. Like, you flip a switch and it's like in Prophet's 100 mode. But a lot of people, including Gleegly, actually modify the 600 to not be as open, right? That way it's, you know, there. I don't know. Nick says, now per function with full CC are two incredibly awesome features of Gleegly 600. I agree with that. Rich says, I think the value of the Prophet 600 is one of the best buys now for vintage gear. I agree with that too. I think the Prophet 600 is almost perfect with the Gleegly mod. I'd just like to figure out what's going on with the amplifiers, and if I could fix that, I would pretty much go there. No good controller for the K4 XT5. That sucks. I think there is one for like the... I think there is one for the XT5, or am I thinking of the drum? There's some drum module Kawai put out based on the K4 engine that has a programmer. Karen says the mod would be more tedious than difficult. That's how I imagine a lot of it goes. All right, so we've got a 60-40 split if you're watching this video and you're not here live. We have a 60-40 split, more or less, after a bunch of votes on is the Polaris worth the extra $500? Now, the Polaris prices tend to do a lot of crazy shit because there's not as many of them. So as of the taping of this video, I said taping like there's tape involved, recording of this video, I was able to find a Polaris 2 for $2,100. Polaris 2 is almost identical to Polaris 1. You don't need to worry about it. So right now it's only a $500 gap, but by the time you watch this video, the prices could go back up, and I think the Polarises have a more of a tendency to go up towards the $2,800 mark, whereas I think the Prophet 600s will probably hang around where they're at for a bit, especially because so many people are buying the Behringer Pro 800 clone of the Prophet 600. So yeah. Oh, Nick is saying there is a panel for the XT5. He has it and it doesn't work. Okay, well that's a shame. I hate that. Because that would be a pretty cool drum module. At some point I should do a Diodes and Rust Part 2. That would be a really cool one to check out. So anyways, guys, I think hopefully this was interesting to you guys. I know I get a lot out of the Versus streams. The videos don't perform as well as when I do a video that's just focused on like one synth very hard. But I think that's good. When I did the Prophet 600 video, I was like, I just don't feel like the oscillators are as beefy, or the sound is as beefy. And I will say, I do think sometimes, like weirdly, with the bass sound, the Prophet 600 did sound beefy. But when it comes to the overall timbre of the synth, I much preferred the sound of the Polaris myself. It's just my opinion, right? It was more warm, more in your face, especially when you push the distortion, it got really awesome. Crystal Love, yes, there will eventually be a volume 2 of Diodes and Rust. There's just too many things I need to like get Inktomi fixed for Mac. I'm working on a couple of products right now that'll be coming out soon. So yes, Karen says these are fun. I appreciate it. Rich, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Brett says, I love those free-running LFOs per voice on the Polaris. Gives more liveliness to the sound. I agree with that very much. That's one of the things that makes the Polaris just so freaking cool, is it's just completely different than any other synth in that way. And I think that's something that, you know, you can't exactly put a price on because there's nothing else out there that does that thing exactly that I'm aware of. So anyways, guys, I think that's a good place to call it for tonight. I hope you guys have a fabulous week. Continue to be excellent, and I'll see you then. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great one. Good night.